From 1909 to 1910, French journalist and author Gaston Leroux published his serialized novel, The Phantom of the Opera, in Le Gaulois, a French newspaper. Gaston Leroux then gave that novel to Hollywood filmmaker Carl Laemmle, who went on to cast Lon Chaney, the Man of a Thousand Faces, as the Phantom in one of silent cinema's most iconic and enduring horror classics, 1925's The Phantom of the Opera. Since then, there has been an adaptation of Phantom of the Opera nearly once every decade, if not more, and November 15th, 1925 will mark the 100th anniversary of the first surviving film adaptation of Phantom of the Opera. Hello, my beautiful angels of music. My name is Summer, and it is that first adaptation that we'll be talking about today in the next installment of 100 Years of Phantom. So this film turning 100 is obviously the catalyst for me making this series, and while planning, I briefly waffled back and forth between going in chronological order by release date or saving this review for the movie's actual centennial anniversary. But ultimately the waffle, landed on the plate on chronological order based on release date, as I think we'd all be better served approaching this as one would building a pyramid or perhaps building an opera house by working from the bottom up. The first episode of 100 Years of Phantom, an outrageously thorough synopsis of Gaston Leroux's Phantom of the Opera, is like the fifth cellar of the Paris Opera House, an underground reservoir hiding the secret home of Eric, the Phantom of the Opera. The house by the lake, built into the retaining wall of the reservoir, is his safest and most secret lair, the place where we see the Phantom's true face. So too, my 4-hour-long breakdown of the plot of the book is the clearest and most accurate version of the book we'll see in this series because it's a video about the book. So anyway, let's say that the 1925 version is the fourth cellar of the Opera House, almost as important in terms of structural support as the book, for the simple fact that this is the first surviving film adaptation. Every version that has come after it owes its success, and perhaps even its existence, to this first film adaptation. If the 1925 silent film hadn't stamped the Phantom's mask and Eric's face into the fabric of pop culture and Hollywood history, there's a very real possibility that Leroux's story might have dwindled into obscurity. Listen, the book is good enough that I know it would have gotten adapted into film at some point, but would there be upwards of 30 film adaptations, the longest-running Broadway musical, the less long-running Ken Hill musical, the Goosebumps musical, an Ice Capades show, a recurring spot at Halloween Horror Nights, and countless book adaptations, including but not limited to a Geronimo Stilton retelling that I read at the wizened and stoop-shouldered age of 28, if not for Lon Chaney, and if not for Carl Laemmle's cast of 5,000? I don't think so. I think this is a very important movie. Now, this is technically the first proper episode of the series, as I would consider the 4-hour-long plot synopsis I made of the novel. Did I mention I made a 4-hour-long plot synopsis of the novel? I would consider that more of a primer, a crash course to prep those who haven't read the novel, so when I start ranking these adaptations by book accuracy, we can all nod along together and be like, yes, I see, I agree, we're all on the same page. And since this is the first proper episode, let me quickly preface with the format of these videos going forward. First, we're going to talk about the plot synopsis, what happens in the movie. Next, of course, will be fun facts and trivia, sort of unmasking the behind the scenes, if you will. And you must, for there's no way to stop me. These fun facts and trivia will be sprinkled throughout the synopsis as I see fit, or if I can't get to everything while I'm going over the plot of the movie, I might do a little chunk at the end. And then finally, I will be ranking these adaptations. Each adaptation will get 2 scores. The first score will be on book accuracy. We'll be looking at the overall adherence of the plot to the source material, the appearance of the mask, the appearance of Eric's unmasked face, Christine's outfit when he kidnaps her for the first time. It's a small detail, but it's always nice to see who's sticking to the source material. The unmasking scene itself, and of course, the final lair scene. The second ranking will be my personal opinion on the adaptation, and this I will base on the uniqueness of the take, how much the Phantom's fate makes me want to cry at the end, and just basically if I like it or not. With all that groundwork laid, let's get into it. We open with a cool title and those old movie credits where it just lists everybody's name before the movie even starts. And in the background, you catch glimpses of Lon Chaney's Phantom lurking in the shadows. Once the credits are through, we cut to a scene where a guy I have to assume is the rat catcher, and if you do not know who the rat catcher is, please see
Stock up and save it, Michael. What did you do? Scenario?
Please see somewhere around the 3-hour, 11-minute mark in my plot synopsis. I'll put the exact time on screen if you don't know who the rat catcher is. Anyway, the rat catcher just stands in the middle of the set saying things to the camera, just yapping yapping away with absolutely no hint as to what words are falling from his lips. Remember, this is a silent film, so when we get dialogue, it flashes up on screen for a few moments on a title card before cutting back to the action. But for whatever reason, and I actually do go over the reason later, but which is the suspense, they just have this dude monologuing and occasionally hiding from the Phantom's sinister silhouette for like 2 minutes straight. And before I did the research that let me figure out what was actually going on in this scene, I came up with a scenario that I think is fitting. What I imagined, the scenario I came up with, was that this was their little Nicole Kidman AMC commercial. This is what would play, like, people are filtering in, the trailers are going, the movie's not quite gonna start yet, but this is letting people know that the feature presentation is about to begin, and I figured maybe they just have some guy filmed on screen talking, and then the theater manager is supposed to come up and be like, "We come to this place for magic. We come to this place to laugh, to cry, to care. Also, you can upgrade your popcorn to a large for a halfpenny." Mind you, that was just my theory at the beginning. None of that's real. None of that's based in research. That was just where my flight of fancy took me while I was trying to figure out why this little guy was just yapping on screen. We then move into the actual story, some establishing shots of the opera. It's poppin', the audience is seated, the dancers are dancing, and in the manager's office, we've got a little business transaction going on. The old pair of managers is signing over the rights of the opera to the new pair of managers, and you can tell from the old manager's sneaky little expressions that they know they're getting a good deal by getting out of this opera business. And as a sort of last note to the new managers, an afterthought, a just in case, just sort of throwing it out there, heads up, they say, "It's barely possible that you may hear of a ghost, a phantom of the opera." I like the way they word that. It's barely possible. Like maybe. They're not saying either way, they're not giving you any certainties, but it might be in the realm of possibility. It's barely possible that you might hear of a ghost of a Phantom of the Opera. Maybe. Who knows? And if the new guys are worried at all about that, they can go talk to the lady who tends box 5. And the new managers, of course, poo-poo this. They're like, "What do you take us for? A bunch of idiots? No, thank you. There's no such thing as goats." Goats don't exist. They are a myth sold to you by big sheep. So stupid. This is the stupidest thing. Oh, okay. The new managers poo-poo this, they don't believe in ghosts, and the old managers leave for good. They're free. They're out of the opera. Popping in with a couple things I've noticed right off the bat. One, the mustache on one of the new managers reminds me greatly of the mustache on the new manager in the 1990 TV miniseries Phantom of the Opera starring Charles Dance. And two, the ballet we see reminds me greatly of the ballet from Act 3.
The ballet, bring it forward, please. The ballet! The ballet! Now, please!
From the 2004 movie musical. I tried to do a little research, but when I googled opera where dancers hold flowers overhead, the only thing that pops up is the musical and the 1925 silent film, which makes me think that the 2004 ballet is a direct reference to this classic piece of cinema. Of course, I'll confirm that when I get to the 2004 movie musical. We're talking about the 1925 one right now. And just to confirm, I did have similar results when I spelled where correctly. So the new managers go to box 5, which if you're not already aware of what box seats are, it's a fancy little room of seats for rich people at the opera. And they speak to the lady who tends the box. Now, I know her name. I know all of their names, but since the movie does not see fit to tell us what her name is, I shan't mention it to you either. Just kidding, it's Madame Jerry. Anyway, the new managers go up to the box keeper and they're like, "Hey, is there a ghost in here?" And the box 5 attendant is like, "Yeah, I think so. It's a dude in a cloak, and sometimes he just disappears." When they go into box 5, there is, in fact, a dude in a cloak. They see him, they leave, they laugh a little bit, they go back in, and he's gone. And now they find that the Phantom of the Opera is there, inside their minds. So, the next thing we cut to is a little superstitious mime-coated guy for more side characters and world building. Surrounding the mime-coated guy is maybe 7 to 9 ballerinas. I'm gonna go with 8. 1, because I counted and there's 8, and also because 8 is much less scary than 7 and less appetizing than 9, and we just, want to keep the 6s from getting scared. So this whole huddle of ballerinas is freaking out because they just saw the shadowed silhouette of the opera ghost. They're pestering this little mime guy for answers and information on the Phantom, but he responds by saying, hey, ask Joseph Bouquet, not me. But before the school of ballerinas can go swim off to find Joseph Bouquet, a guy in a fez comes down the stairs, and I saw him, and I clocked him, and I said, is that the Persian? The ballerinas all said, is that the Phantom? But they are insane. No, clearly, this is the Persian, or the Daroga, a character from the books who saved the Phantom's life at one point and is almost never seen in film adaptations. And I got really excited because it had been a while since I'd seen the silent film, and I was like, is the Persian in this? Did I forget? Do we actually have a film version of Phantom of the Opera with the Persian? We'll get to that later. Okay, so once the man in the fez walks off, the ballerinas drag this little mime to Joseph Bouquet, and they're like, hey, pal, you got the goods on the ghost? And he's like, yeah, the guy's got no nose and really bad skin, and he also sort of looks like a living skeleton, and also I found his trap door on the third cellar where we keep the sets. Come with me, we'll go look at it. So the ballerinas continue to drag this mime, who is not a mime, down to the third cellar to go look at the trap door, and it's here I want to pause for another handful of cool things that I noticed. One, this movie has incredible sets. I did a little research about the set of Phantom of the Opera, and what they did was when Carl Laemmle bought the rights to this story and was getting ready to actually shoot it, they contacted a guy named Ben Carr, who was a French art director who was familiar with the opera house and familiar with Gaston Leroux's work, and he knew that the actual basement of the opera is not really anything like what Gaston Leroux imagined. But what he did was he used his knowledge of both to create these really beautiful detailed sketches of what Gaston Leroux's opera house would look like, and he sent those to Carl Laemmle. And it turns out he didn't realize that his designs had been used until the 1970s when someone showed him a copy of the 1925 silent film. And I just thought that was neat. And you can really tell the attention to detail. These sets are beautiful. And apparently they were also heavily inspired by the illustrations of André Castain. I think that's how it's pronounced. But he was the man who illustrated the first edition of Phantom, like the first print edition of the story, not in the newspapers, but when it was finally bound and printed. They took inspiration from his illustrations, from Ben Carr's illustrations, and they made these incredible sets that are just beautiful to see on screen, and they're so detailed and just wonderful. And Carl Laemmle cast 5,000 extras. They put that on the poster and everything. So when they built these sets, it needed to be able to withstand the weight of thousands of people sitting in the auditorium, being on the stage, moving around. And hey, editing summer here. I'm watching the footage I filmed about the sets, and I don't think I actually, in my script, wrote down the point I wanted to make, which is that I think the set is super cool. When it was built to withstand the weight of the cast of 5,000 extras. So it was built with steel and concrete, which means it wasn't easily torn down. Soundstage 28 was built from the ground up for the Phantom of the Opera. And after the production was wrapped, they did go on to use it in several other movies and TV shows. 1943 Phantom, I think I saw something where it said it was in an episode of Sting. So by the time it hit 2014, which is when it was torn down, it was the oldest soundstage that had been built for a specific project that was still standing. So 2014, nearly 90 years after they built it, the set itself was preserved and put in storage, and the soundstage 28 torn down. It really is just so cool to see what they did. Not just the auditorium set, which is the most iconic and what was most used later in film, but the sets of backstage, the catacombs they built, the dressing rooms, the front lobby of the opera. This whole movie was filmed on a soundstage in Hollywood. They didn't go to Paris to film any of this. This was all filmed on the Universal lot. So what you're seeing is something that people built, and it's incredible to see what they did. The craftsmanship and the artistry put into these sets is just amazing. Practical things that you actually are filming on camera, they're always going to look good and they're going to look real because they were real. They were actually in the room. These sets that have so much detail and character and craft put into them are going to look amazing because the actors were able to move on them, climb on them, run across little rope bridges. The light catches them and casts these intricate shadows. And that actually brings me to point 2, which is the lighting. Because speaking of the lighting, this movie does some really, really cool things with shadows. Because of course, when you have no color, you can really only play with light. And this movie takes full advantage of that. You've got these detailed sets that catch the light and cast their own shadows. You've got big, sharp, dramatic shadows thrown up on the wall, get like the classic horror movie underlighting when we see the Phantom unmasked. But my favorite detail is what they do with the Phantom himself in these early scenes in the movie. Because for the first part of the movie, before he finally reveals himself to Christine, you almost only see his shadow. There's like a tiny scene or two where you see a little bit more of him, but I think this is a super effective way to convey that idea of ghostliness. He's only a shadow, a silhouette. Since the movie has no sound, he can't simply be the voice as he is in the book, but he can simply be a shape. I think that is a really clever way that they conveyed his absence of presence on screen. And we don't see him really fully on screen. We don't see the full actor until Christine herself discovers that the voice that's been teaching her is only a man, which I think is a very cool effect. All right, so back to the ballerinas and the little mime. They're all standing around looking at the trap door, and the little mime goes, "Hey, be careful, guys. You know, ghosts don't like being talked about." Now, one thing I'd like to make clear is that the nervous little mime guy, his name is apparently Florine Papillon, is not in the books. In this scene, he pretty much takes the place of La Sorelli, the prima ballerina. This is sort of an unobtrusive change, as La Sorelli herself doesn't make many appearances in the novel past the manager's farewell gala, so trading her out for a mime sure doesn't change much. And when you look at the Wikipedia for the film, you do see a list of cast members who were in deleted scenes, and it looks like they did have a La Sorelli, but this film went through a lot of changes and different iterations, and so they eventually settled on Florine Papillon. Isn't a huge change and doesn't affect the spirit of the story. After giving that ominous warning that ghosts don't like to be talked about, we cut to the manager's office, where La Carlotta's mother is arguing with the new managers about the threatening notes her daughter's been receiving from the Phantom of the Opera, telling her daughter to step down so that a certain Swedish soprano named Christine Daae can sing instead. Now, owl-eared listeners and diehard Phantom fans might have picked up on something odd in that statement. Yes, you heard me right. La Carlotta's mom is arguing with the managers. This was such a small but baffling departure from the novel that I had to know more. The character of La Carlotta in the books is a well-established operatic soprano and prima donna of the opera house, and in every other version of Phantom that I've seen, Carlotta is a grown woman who handles her own business. But for reasons I could not fathom, they cast a woman who could have very well been La Carlotta. Like, she had the look, she had the poise, she had the presence of La Carlotta, but cast her instead as La Carlotta's mother and sent her in to argue on her daughter's behalf. So I did a little research and I did a little digging, and what I found is that the movie I'm reviewing right now technically isn't the 1925 silent film. Let's go into a nice juicy little tangent, shall we? Now, going perhaps a little further back than is needed, I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but at the beginning of this video, I didn't just say that this is the first film adaptation of the book. I said it was the first surviving film adaptation of the book. And that's because the first film adaptation is a lost Austrian version called Das Phantom der Oper that came out in 1916 and is now considered a lost film. According to the very short Wikipedia article, no copy of this film exists, no photographs, no posters, and the only items that are available are text advertisements and a summary. It was filmed in Germany in 1915, released in 1916, and ran in theaters until 1917. Now, I was able to find a Reddit thread in r/box5 that led me to a couple of good YouTube videos that go into detail about the film. I especially enjoyed Unmasking the Lost 1916 Phantom of the Opera by Clersington. I'm going to link both videos below, and I'm also going to have a Google Doc with all of the links to the resources I used to write my script, but those videos led me to the Classic Horror Film Board, and the Classic Horror Film Board seems to be where all of the information we do have on this 1916 film originates. And that's because years ago somebody posed a question about the missing film, and then a user named Dr. Kiss spent like 6 years or something finding and translating German primary sources about the 1916 film. And between the new German censorship laws and the tensions of the time, it's unlikely Gaston Leroux had anything to do with this production, just like Bram Stoker had nothing to do with Nosferatu, because apparently German filmmakers at that time were just adapting what they wanted when they wanted. And those same difficulties likely played into why the film didn't get a wider release and was eventually lost. And another Nosferatu connection, the screenplay for Das Phantom der Oper was written by Greta Schroeder, the actress who played Ellen Hutter in the original Nosferatu film. The crossovers, the linking of film history, the gothic romance of it all. This would be like Lily Rose Depp writing the screenplay for the first film adaptation of Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which I just think is neat. Das Phantom ran in theaters as one of the most successful films for that year. The 2 reviews of the film that remain laud the cinematography, the sets, and the acting as superb. And based on the synopsis contained in one of the surviving reviews, it seems like it was a very book-accurate version of the story. They kept the major beats but made some slight changes to condense the story for time, and it also seems like maybe Christine's mom was alive in that version, but it also had the Persian as the Persian, and now it's lost forever. My path is clear. I have to learn German and build a time machine and go watch this for myself in theaters and then steal the 1,381 meters of film and bring them back to the future with me for presentation. Unfortunately, taking a time machine to World War I Germany raises a lot of philosophical questions that make my quest to get my hands on a few reels of film pretty inconsequential. But I gave it some thought, and I think if, while everybody else is over here discussing the morals and ethics of time travel and potentially altering the course of human history, I could just hop into the machine, quickly go back to the early 1900s, catch a quick flick, commit Grand Theft Video, and get back in time for everyone's decision on how we should correctly utilize time travel. Does that seem okay with everybody? Just a quick in and out, 2 hours, and we'll have preserved lost media. Just take care of one thing real fast. So that is the first film adaptation. But what we're talking about here today is the first surviving film adaptation. Coming back onto the correct path, though we are still on a tangent, the 1925 silent film was originally released as, you guessed it, a silent film in 1925. But then we fast forward a couple of years to 1927 when the entire landscape of film was altered by the introduction of sound. So what Universal Studios did in 1929 was take a few scenes out, add a few new scenes in, and re-released the 1925 Phantom of the Opera as a talkie, a movie with sound. Now, it didn't have sound all the way through, it was more of a hybrid with just a few key scenes that had audio.
There is no nose.
Ooh, a black cat. The door.
At your feet.
But one of those scenes was Carlotta's performance in Faust, the night of the chandelier crash. Now, because there was no need for Carlotta to actually sing in a silent film, Mr. Lammel hadn't worried about casting an actual opera singer when they originally gave the role of Carlotta to Virginia Pearson in the 1925 film. But because they did want a sound sequence where the chandelier crashed in the middle of the Jewel song in Faust in the 1929 re-release, they recast Mary Fabian, an actual opera singer, as La Carlotta, but kept the original footage of Virginia Pearson where they could, and recontextualized her character as Carlotta's mother. Then, as the years passed and various versions of the film got cut and intercut and film reels deteriorated and had to be spliced together to be preserved, and eventually the film itself entered public domain, what you'll get a lot of the time is what I have here on DVD, which is technically the 1929 sound re-release.
Breaking news!
I am having such a hard time finding clips of this movie, and you wouldn't think that would be the case because this is a film that in its entirety is in the public domain. I should put a sweater on. Hold on. Excuse my scandalous shoulders. Okay, so here's the thing. I have a copy of this movie on DVD, and I thought, you know what? Instead of just filming the screen of my television, because that's what I do when I don't have access to the digital version or can't find a digital version that I can like pull clips from, I thought this is a movie in the public domain. It should be totally easy and totally fine and totally normal and not a big deal at all for me to actually just pull clips from the movie. And doing my research, I figured out that what I have on DVD is likely closer to the 1929 sound version, and what I ended up finding was the 1930 sound reissue of the movie on Internet Archive with sound itself. And so I thought, okay, if I'm pulling tiny clips from this, I think it should be fine and I'll get my point across. Like, I'll be able to find the footage I need in this re-release version. Well, I did that, and it's so cool to actually see the sound in these scenes, and I've learned so much, like these big long sections where I'm like, why are they having these people talk on screen for such a long time without dialogue cards? Were audiences in the past just like more patient? Is that why they just didn't mind watching somebody go with no idea what they were saying. No, that's because those are scenes from the sound version that actually have audio. Like when Florine Papillon is surrounded by ballerinas, all the ballerinas are like,
Yeah, no. You did too. It was enormous.
or like when you see Florine Papillon himself, you actually, the first time you see him, he gets scared of a black cat and you hear a man go, meow.
Ow.
I was like, wow, okay, I'm learning a lot, and this is really cool to get clips from this, but they also recolored a lot of the footage in a way that my DVD wasn't colored. Like, the only part that really has color in my copy is the masquerade scene, which is always supposed to have color. Like, there were 17 minutes of color footage in this film in 1925. My version has that, but it didn't have any of the screen tinting that I was seeing in the 1930s version. So the scene with the ballerinas was just fully black and white in my DVD, but it was like tinted purple in the 1930s version. So I was like, okay, cool. Maybe I should try to find my version online so I can get clips closer to what I actually based my script on. So I was like, cool, fine, perfect. Yeah, that's what I'll do. And so I've been trying to find a version of that's close to the one distributed to me by Alpha Video Distributors Incorporated. And every single link I click on is a different cut of this movie. I found a 1925 silent film, but the opening title is tinted green, which is different than the one I have. I have one where the opening title was tinted a vivid blue. And so I'm like, okay, hopefully in body these are going to be similar, but like already there are differences because it's not just the black and white version. Or I found one on Silent Movie Fan that's the 1925 it's called The Phantom of the Opera reconstructed 1925 version with original score. Hey guys, 8:33 a.m. Friday editing summer here to interrupt 7:40 a.m. Thursday editing summer to say that this version that I was so excited about finding, the Phantom of the Opera parentheses reconstructed 1925 version with original score close parentheses HD close parentheses, uploaded by Silent Film Fan, has made me realize that I've never seen the 1925 silent film Phantom of the Opera at all. Super frustrating to figure that out 5 days into editing this video and 30 minutes into the final cut, but here we are. So, as I've established, there are tons of different versions of this movie floating around out there, but most seem to be close to what I have on DVD, the hybrid of the 1925 silent film and the 1929 sound re-release. There might be some slight differences in tinting or a couple subtle shifts in the title cards, but mostly they are the same, which is why you'll see some footage filmed on my TV and some tinted footage as I've been scrambling to find the closest version to what this video script is based on. But the differences between the hybrid version I have on DVD and the reconstructed version I just found isn't confined to just the tinting of the footage or the length of some of the clips. No, there's an opening crawl that says while the original 1925 cut of the movie was lost, this version that I found was reconstructed using footage from a 16mm watch at home version of the film, and the entire opening is different than the version I have on DVD. Now, keep in mind, this new reconstructed version that I just found, I haven't had a chance to watch it yet because I'm in the middle of editing this video, and this video should be uploaded within the next 4 hours. We'll see how that goes. But as I was skimming through the first 10 minutes of the reconstructed version on 2x speed so I could pull some clips to highlight whatever Thursday editing summer was rambling about, I realized that even the first 10 minutes of this version are so much different and so much better than the hybrid. So just to establish where we are in the story, in the hybrid version that I have on DVD, it has a short title card about the opera followed by establishing shots of the exterior of the opera, the foyer, the stage, the audience, the ballet, and then a new title card about the managers saying that a strange deal was taking place. Then we get the scene of them in box 5, Florine and the ballerines, Carlotta's mom, and now we're caught up. We haven't even met Raoul and Christine yet. In this reconstructed version, we get a title card likening Leroux to Edgar Allan Poe, then a title card alluding to a mysteries in the cellar of the opera that establishes the mood and atmosphere of the movie going forward. Then, after a few establishing shots, we spend time in the lobby of the opera with Raoul and Philippe, getting title cards for both of them, explaining who they are and crediting who the actors playing them are. And once they're established, we actually spend time with Raoul. We get to see some girls simper and flirt over him, and him, politely tip his hat back. We get to see him walk into the box at the opera. We get an establishing shot of the chandelier so that we know it's important going forward. And then we meet Christine. She gets her own title card. They have a little interaction in her dressing room. And it's not until after we meet our main characters and they're established that we move on to the managers. And the title card for the managers themselves actually says what's going on. It doesn't just say a strange deal is taking place. It says that the old managers are signing over control of the opera to the new managers. It's more detailed, it's better aligned with the plot of Phantom of the Opera, and it's just better storytelling. And the reason I wanted to explain all of this to you is because a lot of what happens in this opening scene of this version that's reconstructed to be as close to the original 1925 cut as possible negates some of the complaints I make later in the video. My biggest issue with the hybrid version that I have on DVD is that it's vague. There are a lot of details cut out that make this a muddled retelling of Phantom of the Opera. And then there are times when the dialogue cards on screen don't quite seem to match the actions being played out by the actors. And the worst thing the hybrid version does is late in the third act, we're introduced to a random character who was not introduced earlier in the movie and also isn't in the books. And then we spend a bunch of time cutting back and forth between this new random character and the drama of the final lair scene, which is very frustrating. And what I found is within the first 10 minutes of this reconstructed version, so many of those complaints are addressed. The main characters are better established. We get a better sense of the atmosphere and world. This character I specifically complain about not being introduced early enough in the movie is introduced within the first 10 minutes. It was so frustrating to figure all of this out so late in the editing game, but also super fascinating just in terms of this film's history to see what they kept and what they altered with the sound re-release. For example, the scenes where Raoul and Christine meet in her dressing room are visually almost identical, but they're in two separate spots in the story and have different title cards. In the reconstructed 1925 version, their meeting takes place before Christine goes on stage. She's nervous, Raoul comforts her, and she says she feels compelled to go on, planting the seeds of the control the Phantom has on her. In the hybrid version, their meeting takes place after Carlotta's mom has complained to the managers about the notes she's getting, after a scene between Raoul and Philippe in their box seat where Philippe asks Raoul about some rumors concerning Christine's mysterious suitor that Raoul dismisses out of hand, and after Christine gets airlifted into the flies at the end of the show. Then he goes to her dressing room and congratulates her on a performance well done and is immediately like, hey, now that you've achieved all the success you can achieve by singing one time on the stage, you're ready to quit and get married to me, right? And she's like, no, I can never leave the opera. The 1925 version seems to be laying out the story in a way that's a little bit more, I don't know, delicate or elegant, in that it's laying out the first few threads so that we can follow those threads through the richer tapestry of the story. In the sound re-release, because they truncated that opening, they had to fit more exposition into fewer lines of dialogue, and it comes across more ham-fisted, honestly. It's bare bones, it's blunter, and it's not as good. And another thing is, her behavior on screen makes more sense in what I've seen of the reconstructed 1925 version, since that edited version is likely closer to the script that Mary Philbin was acting from. And I've always wondered when I watch this movie why some of the shots seem to linger over long, or the actions don't quite seem to match the dialogue on the title cards, and it turns out it's because the long lingering scenes probably had sound, and the title cards don't match because they were not the original scripted dialogue. With this research, I've answered another question, and that is the mystery of why that dude was jabbering so much at the beginning with no title sequences.
That was the scourge of Paris, our Phantom of the Opera.
Mystery solved? My name's Summer, and this is mostly a solved mystery. Boop, boop, beep, boop.
Beware his many traps, and also the rats.
And this even goes further where there are differences between the hybrid version and the sound re-release. I'm about to hop back into this scene with my actual footage again, but one thing I'd like to note is as the dressing room scene plays out with a sad Charlie Brown version of Raoul standing outside the dressing room listening to Christine speak to the man's voice, the sound version has audio of the back and forth between Christine and the voice. Now, I'm not sure who's actually doing the talking, because what I learned about Lon Chaney and Mary Philbin is that each of them only has one sound film credit to their names, and neither of them is credited as speaking in Phantom of the Opera, so I think these may just be voice actors. But what was interesting is that the dialogue being said doesn't match the title card on screen.
Henceforth, your life belongs to him.
The voice says it's going to demand Christine's love. That's what the title card says. And then Christine's voice responds,
I shall always be grateful to my love.
Then we see Raoul smile in the hallway and then the Phantom run off. But that, doesn't make sense in the context of the scene, because what is she talking about? It's just the dialogue chosen seems to be in an effort to flesh out the scene around the dialogue cards that were there, but it doesn't really make sense in the context of the story itself. And it's almost like each re-edit of this movie was a new game of telephone, getting further and further from the story that the book was telling, dropping important details and adding new details that don't quite make sense and just serve to muddle an already bare bones and somewhat confused retelling of Gaston Leroux's story. Anyway, let's hop back into my actual footage and just keep in mind from here on out that everything I'm saying pertains to the hybrid version of this movie, not any version that is closer to the original cut. Also, plot twist, this is an off-the-shelf review where I take one of my films off my shelf and review it. Christine is played by Mary Philbin, and she has a really interesting story. Mary Philbin was shy and reserved and super close to her family, but she also loved acting in theater. And when she was younger, I think her family was living in Chicago, she entered her headshot into a competition to be cast in a Hollywood movie, and she won the role. But her parents, very protective, weren't willing to let her move to Hollywood until they learned that their good friends, the Lamels, were also heading out to California. Now, the Lamels in question did not include Carl Laemmle, as in Carl Laemmle presents Gaston Leroux, The Phantom of the Opera, starring Lon Chaney, Mary Philbin, Norman Kelly, and a cast of 5,000 extras, but instead his relatives. And it turned out Mary Philbin was best friends with Carla Laemmle, that Carl Laemmle's niece. And her real name was actually Rebecca, but let's be honest, if your uncle was the owner of Universal City and his name was Carl and the name Carla was just sitting right there, wouldn't you take it? Wouldn't you take it? And apparently, I'm pretty sure I saw somewhere once sometime that Carla Laemmle is one of the dancers that you see on stage, which is neat. But anyway, Carla was the conduit through which Mary was able to get her first break and slowly built up her film resume, becoming quite a popular starlet and was frequently featured on the cover of magazines for her, dainty, delicate, ethereal beauty. When it came to her acting, she was good, she had talent, but she'd never been trained professionally. Now, when Mary was working with a good director, like a strong, talented director, her lack of training wasn't an issue. She was able to put in a good performance with good direction. But if she was working with a mediocre director, that lack of training would become really apparent, especially when paired with her natural inclination to be shy and reserved, and the fact that her very strict parents, specifically her very strict mother, were always on set with her. And what I learned in my research was that Rupert Julian, the director of Universal Studios Presents Carl Laemmle's Presents Gaston Leroux's The Phantom of the Opera, starring Lon Chaney, Mary Philbin, Norman Kerry, and a cast of 5,000 extras, was not a good director. Oh my gosh, I just scratched my neck. Please ignore that. But he was not a good director, and he was super weird on set, always obsessively adjusting her clothes and her wig, until finally his wife, who was one of Mary's close friends, stepped in and took over her wardrobe so her husband would stop adjusting stuff. But the saddest part of Mary's life was that she fell in love with a producer named Paul Kohner. He proposed, but because she was Roman Catholic and he was Jewish, her dance mom's mom forbade her from being able to marry him, and she was forced to choose between her family, that she was very, very close to, or the love of her life, and she ended up returning the ring. Years later, it was discovered upon Paul Kohner's death that he had kept every letter Mary had written him. When she found that out, Mary cried because she had done the same. She had kept all of their letters. She kept both of them, kept all the letters they wrote to each other until they both died. Right around the time she broke off her relationship with Paul Kohner, the talkies started to come out, and her voice, which was described as very light and girlish and sweet, didn't do well on the recording equipment of that time. It played back as super high and squeaky, and so her career opportunities started drying up, and she eventually basically became a recluse. Now it says recluse, but then it also says that she left her house to church and shop and hang out with people she was close to, and if that's being a recluse, well, call me a recluse. That's basically all I leave my house for anyway. But the more sad aspect is that she never fell in love again. She lived with her parents until they both died, and then she lived in the same house where her family had lived until she succumbed to Alzheimer's in 1993. She lived there alone. She spent her whole life by herself. That's sad. It's sad to me. And then the mini biography says, the original Christine was dead at age 91. I don't know, that gets me. It gets me every time. Anyway, that's Mary Philbin, our first on-screen Christine, and she's a delight. When we meet her, she is singing on stage, wrapping up her performance as Marguerite in Faust, because she did, in fact, take over for Carlotta. Then Christine is airlifted off the stage and into the flies, signaling the end of an incredible first performance. The major beats of this movie, and many of the details, are very similar to the book, but there are some slight changes, like the fact that this is a normal performance and not a farewell gala. Christine doesn't faint, and in the dressing room, Raoul is both recognized and welcomed, until he's like, hey, babe, congrats on your big success. Now that you've sung one opera one time, you can scratch this off your bucket list and retire, and you and I can go get married. And Christine is immediately like, oof, Raoul, sorry, but I can never actually see you again. Thank you. Bye-bye. The thing is, we can't get too mad about these tiny changes that are made for time, because this isn't an, 8-episode miniseries directed by Guillermo del Toro and starring Jamie Campbell Bower as the Phantom. It's the perfect casting. It's the perfect casting. Look at Crimson Peak. Look at Jamie Campbell Bower in Stranger Things, in which he has no nose as Vecna. And then I want you to take a listen to Jamie Campbell Bower in Sweeney Todd. I know Kenny Ortega's doing something for Disney Plus. I know, and I'm going to watch it when it comes out, but that's not what the people want. The people are going to have it because they have it. We're 20 years behind on a Phantom adaptation, so I'll take what I can get, but this is what the people want. This is what the people want. The people, me, want Guillermo del Toro directing Jamie Campbell Bower as a Phantom in an 8-episode miniseries that is accurate to the book and gets to go in all the detail that it wants to. That is what the people yearn for. Who would play Christine? I'm not sure. Me. I'm not a soprano. I don't care. Florence Pugh. I think she would have the look, but I don't think she has the voice. I don't know. Probably not Florence Pugh. I haven't thought about Christine too much because she's me. Okay. This is not a sprawling epic with plenty of time to delve into book accuracy. It is working with 92 minutes of screen time and a handful of title cards. So far, very, very book accurate. And because it is book accurate, that means we find a sad, downtrodden Raoul Charlie Browning it out in the hallway when a mellifluous man voice starts issuing from behind Christine's closed door. And here's where we get some of those great shadow shots of the Phantom, where even the audience isn't allowed to see beyond the shape of him, beyond his silhouette. He is a ghost for Christine and the viewer. And this is when he puts on his big spiel. He's basically like, Christine, you're amazing, everybody loves you, all of Paris loves you, and as long as you break up with your stupid boyfriend, there's nowhere to go but up. And Christine is surprisingly on board with this. She's like, 100%, I am a career-driven woman, music is my life, graphic design is my passion. She actually made all the dialogue cards for the movie, by the way. But then this mysterious, mellifluous man voice says a little something else, says a little something extra, something that's not in the books. He says, soon I will take physical form and demand your love. And she's just like, okay, boss. All right, cool. And here's where I have to pause for a couple of other things that I noticed. One, that's bonkers. That's a bonkers thing for someone masquerading as a ghost to say, but it's also bonkers of Christine to be even remotely surprised later down the line by anything he does when he laid out his exact plan in advance. Like, he's not hiding anything. He said in his very pretty voice, Christine, you did great, and soon I will take corporeal form and demand you love me. But then later, when he takes corporeal form and demands she love him, she acts surprised. Like, were you not listening? Did you not hear? Did you not read the cue cards you designed? He told you exactly what he was doing. The second thing I noticed was that another big departure from the novel is that they never call the Phantom the Angel of Music. And that's a bigger change. The Angel of Music features very heavily in the book. The whole reason Christine takes lessons with a mysterious voice in the first place is because she thinks it's an angel sent by her dead father. But in this version, while there is reference to spirits or him being a spirit, and one mention of his voice being described as angelic, he just refers to himself as her master. And I get it. Silent film, Christine has all that opera practice so she can only work on so many cue cards at a time. But still, that is such a foundational aspect of this story, to Christine's behavior, to the reason he's able to get away with it for so long. To have that removed, but still have him be a spirit, just feels off. Like at that point, I think you just gotta say, hey, I'm a guy and I'm talking to you from behind your wall. And like during the unmasking scene, Christine is like, oh, you're the Phantom of the Opera. Why are you surprised? You're not talking to the angel of music, you're talking to a spirit in the opera. Dare I say a ghost in the dare I say a phantom of the opera. Why are you surprised? Now it's time for opera round 2, Electric Boogaloo, and Carlotta's mom is back to be like, hey, guess what? Christine is still having her friends send weird notes to my daughter trying to get her to stay home, but my baby? Oh, she's going to sing tonight. And so Carlotta does sing. She sings at the opera, she sings as Marguerite, even though, per the Phantom's latest note, it means she will sing in a house with a curse on it. What could that possibly mean? What tragedy could this portend? If you said the iconic chandelier crash, you'd be 100% correct. We get another cool shadow shot of the Phantom, still implying he's a ghost. Now, shortly before the crash, Raoul tries shooting a shot with Christine again. He sends her a card. He's kind of like, hey, girl, how you living? And Christine responds by writing him a little note that's like, please don't ever speak to me again. XOXO, Christine. Then, bing, bang, boom, stuff happens, the chandelier crashes, and those 5,000 extras the poster talks about go to work. They are panicking, flailing. One girl falls and gets trampled. Someone gets carried down the stairs. Everyone's running around, waving their arms. It's pandemonium. Christine panics and starts running towards her dressing room. Eagle-eyed Raoul, from his box seat, sees she's about to run to her dressing room, and he decides to run that way himself. He has just enough time to run into the man in the fez from the beginning who should be the Persian but technically isn't, make his way down the hall into her dressing room, and hide himself away before Christine enters the dressing room herself. Because if there's one thing that Raoul Chaney is gonna do, he's gonna go to Christine's dressing room when she asks him not to. Please don't ever speak to me again. He's in the dressing room. He's listening. He's hiding inside of it. He's gonna be in that room. So everybody's in the dressing room together. Raoul is hidden, Christine is not hidden, and Christine's effervescent, incorporeal master is like, hey baby girl, I'm corporeal now and I'm here to demand your love exactly as I laid out to you in my plan. Come on. Come through the mirror so I can demand your love with my corporeal form. So she goes on through the mirror. It opens up like a door. She walks right on through. It slams shut behind her before Raoul can get through it himself. And now we find ourselves on the other side of the mirror. And one detail I really like that you don't get to see very often in these film adaptations is the shot of the wheel or mechanism that controls the door. In the book, the Persian spends a lot of time describing how the spinning mirror works to Raoul, and I like that we get to sort of see that side of it. And Christine, she's vibing. She's having a nice time. She is not like her book counterpart who's like, wait a second, I was supposed to be with the Angel of Music and now I'm in a dark and musty hallway alone. Something here's not right. She's just like standing there, cheery as heck, big smile on her face, seems really happy. So I have to assume that she's listening to her master sing, but this is a silent film, so we'll never know. But that's what I assume is happening, that he's soothing her with his voice. And then, out of the shadows, a nervous little hand reaches towards her and finally lands on her shoulder, and she very reasonably gets spooked when she turns around and sees a man wearing perhaps the most distressing phantom mask I have seen in any of these. Most of the movies go for like allure or like mystery, except for maybe, the R-rated horror version, Robert Englund's Mask, which we'll get to eventually. But this one, I can't tell you what it's going for. It has teeny tiny little eye holes, just like 2 little holes stamped in the middle and painted on eyes and eyebrows, which I do not like. It is horrifying to look at. I think it's actually worse than his unmasked face. That would bother me. That would bother me if I saw that in the dark. But what I do appreciate about it is that it has the little piece of cloth that's described in the book, Barbe du Masque, or the beard of the mask. It allows him to hide more of his face, but be able to speak and sing without his voice being impeded. I like that this mask has that little piece of cloth. So this masked man is leading her down the hallway in the dark, and she is concerned and confused because... Search me. I mean, he told her he was going to become corporeal and then demand her love, and she agreed and willingly walked through the mirror and was not bamboozled and was not bamboozled at the time. Like the plot points were laid out for her, and she said, "Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm tracking with all of these." And now she's in the dark with the guy she was there to join, and she's worried. Because we don't have the underlying betrayal of the angel being a man, he's like, I'm gonna be a man now, and she met a man. However, I will say that mask would have thrown me off too, with its weird little painted on eyes. So maybe that is what's worrying and distressing her. Then there's this really neat effect where the image goes super blurry for a moment. And initially I thought this was unintentional, as there are sections of this movie where the image is really degraded. But I think that this particular instance was done on purpose, because after the camera goes out of focus and then focuses again, Christine is in what we have to assume is a music-based trance, which calls back to her attitude in that scene behind the mirror in the novel where the Phantom might have drugged her as he led her down towards his house. So Christine is walking, but her head is like all the way back. Her attitude before, nervous, a little scared, alert, has completely changed since the shift in focus, and now she's basically sleepwalking. Her head is all the way back, and for the drama of it all, her pretty, gauzy white wrap is just dragging behind her as she goes, and that's cinema. The long white swath of fabric stark against the gloomy backdrop of the catacombs that trails after her as she sleepwalks dreamily into a nightmare. The Phantom making sure it drapes gracefully behind the horse. The fact that she puts the wrap in the dirty catacomb water so it can trail behind the boat as they row to his hidden lair. Not just cinema, poetic cinema. It's what the film demands. And sure, she abandons her wrap in the boat, but that's because it had completed its purpose. And also she was in a trance. And also it was covered in dirty catacomb water. I don't know, I just really liked the visuals of the scene. The sets, the lighting. I loved the gauzy scarf trailing after her. It adds this very like dreamlike quality, and I love it. And it's around this point that she starts to wake up and realize that she is alone in an underground bunker house with a man in a mask. And he starts going, I love you. I've been loving you. Your goodness and purity are going to make me a better man because we are going to be together forever, whether you like it or not. That's when she loses her cool a bit, because the reality of the plan starts to set in. Sure, it's all well and good when a silhouette is like, I'm going to become corporeal and demand your love, but time comes for the piper to be paid, and it's like, oh, wait a second. But it's warranted. I'm not, listen, I am still on Christine's side. I just don't understand her confusion, but that's not her fault. That's the screenwriter's fault for cutting the angel of music. It makes her action senseless if you don't have that underlying sorrow of her grief over her father's death blinding her to the realities of the situation. So it's not her fault that her actions don't make sense. It's not. It's not her fault. But she flails her arms around, she runs around his house, she finds his bedroom that has a coffin for a bed, very Leroux accurate. There's this great scene that actually made me laugh out loud. She runs in, she sees the coffin, panics, runs out, looks at the Phantom, and he's just leaning against the wall, waiting for her, cool as can be, and one of his hands lifts slowly and he just goes, that's my bed. And it's just all in that hand movement there. Just the way he does that is fantastic. And he goes on to explain that he sleeps in a coffin because it reminds him of the final rest, the dreamless sleep that cures all ills, and he is our emo king, and to him we pledge our undying goth loyalty. I was never emo or goth. I am sorry, you guys. I did the emo haircut in like 10th or 11th grade, and I wore brightly colored skinny jeans for that whole year, but I was rocking out to Reliant K and 1,000 Foot Crutch. I never had a My Chemical Romance phase, and I in fact did not even know who Gerard Way was for years. Honestly, I probably didn't know his name until those diagrams started going around showing the domino effect from 9/11 to Dakota Johnson causing the downfall of Ellen DeGeneres, so. But I did love Phantom, and I always will. I always will. And maybe we can be goth enough in that together. Okay. Thank you. Anyway, Christine's a little detective, and she's putting two and two together, and she's like, "Oh, you're the Phantom of the Opera." She's like, "Oh, the ghost." And he responds by saying, "If I am the Phantom, it's because man's hatred has made me so." Banger line. Banger line. And also, another point I'd like to make is that if I shall be saved, it will be because your love redeems me. And me personally, just my own personal opinion, I think that seems like a lot of pressure to put on someone on your first date. I think it's a lot of pressure to put on anybody during any date because people should not rely on other people for their salvation. I know a guy. And I'm not joking. I'm not joking. I do know a guy. So he continues to drop his sad backstory on Christine, and he's like, "Men once knew me as Eric with a K, but for many years I have lived in these cellars as a nameless legend." And at this point, the assembled information is just too much for sweet Christine to bear, and she faints. And his body language in this scene is fantastic. Every movement he makes just screams like, "Oh, good heavens, I've killed her, she's dead." Her arms are flopping about all crazy as he picks her up and carries her to a very fancy room, the Louis Philippe room as it's called in the book. And it has this fabulous boat bed that I'm almost positive had to be an inspiration for the giant swan bed in the 2004 movie musical. And also, I did some research on the boat bed because of a piece of trivia that I saw on the IMDb page. It was originally made for a French entertainer named, I believe it's pronounced Gabby Delise, and she was so fabulous that she made the King of Portugal fall in love with her, and this boat bed was based on a boat that floated around in a grotto that he had made in his castle, and it is said to have appeared in 5 movies, including Phantom of the Opera and Sunset Boulevard, and is now considered missing. But you know what? I bet if we all look hard enough, we can find this boat bed, and it's probably in the same spot that the 1916 Phantom is hidden. In ashes or dust, I guess, because it doesn't exist anymore. No, Spider-Man. Why, Summer? That doesn't have anything to do with this movie. Stop. That's not even a good bit. I know you wanted to use that bit because it's funny and you like doing the Willem Dafoe voice, but it doesn't fit in this video. It doesn't. No. It doesn't. No. Spider-Man. When Christine wakes up, she notices a bunch of really cute shoes and a beautiful mirror that has her name engraved on it and a wedding dress and a veil. And so this has all been very clearly well planned out and prepared for in advance, and there is obviously more to come, and this is a terrible thing. One of the biggest bummers is that I want so bad to see what the details are in this scene, but at least in the copy that was preserved into digital and burned onto DVD by the fine folks at Alpha Video Distributors Incorporated, this seems to be one of, if not the most poorly preserved segments of film in the whole movie. Like, I'm not sure what happened to the original reel or the original footage. In this part, it gets really super flickery and then fades almost to black in spots. It's just like super dark and hard to make out those details. But, you know, what are you going to do? It's almost 100 years old. So Christine finds a note edged in black that says, "My dear Christine, you are in no peril as long as you do not touch my mask. You will be free as long as your love for the spirit of Eric overcomes your fear." And again, that's a lot of pressure on what must be construed as the continuation of a first date. Nobody's had a chance to go home. Nobody's had a chance to think things over. Somebody's still trapped in somebody else's house. So she leaves the Louis Philippe room and finds Eric playing the organ. And anytime he seems to be singing or playing music, you can see her whole body relax. And that's because music always has and always will mean the world to Christine in any retelling. It is the thing that binds Eric and Christine together the most. She gets this sort of wild look in her eyes. What she hears is his Don Juan triumphant. Now, this is different than the book. In the book, Eric would not let Christine hear his Don Juan triumphant, claiming that she couldn't handle the heat, that it was too powerful and too dark for someone like her. And when she finally does hear it, it is overwhelming and almost too much for her in its sorrow and its anger and its rage. But in this scene, the Phantom says, "Since I first saw your face, this music has been singing to me of you and of love triumphant." But that wildness doesn't leave her eyes, and we can practically see the wheels turning as she moves closer. She's gonna take off that mask. She comes up right behind him and briefly touches his shoulder, and his whole body like seizes up because, oh my gosh, a girl touched him. And then she pulls her sneaky little hands back. But once he's playing again, she reaches out and just yanks his mask right off. Now I think it's high time we discussed Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces. What I learned was Lon Chaney's grandfather started a school for deaf mutes, and his parents met at that school, meaning Lon Chaney was the child of 2 deaf parents. He was adept in sign language, and he's quoted as saying, "Gesture was always a thing of great significance." This unique upbringing, paired with his deep respect and love for the craft of acting, are what makes his performances so strong and clear and impressive, even in a silent film and even after so many years have passed. Look at the moments I mentioned earlier, the hand as he says, "That's my bed," his body language as we see Christine faint. We get the Phantom's wry, strange humor from the books conveyed in that simple flick of the wrist. We get his care for Christine and his immediate full body reaction to her fainting. Joan Crawford was in a movie with Lon Chaney in 1927 called The Unknown, and is credited as saying that watching Lon Chaney work was when she became aware for the first time of the difference between standing in front of a camera and acting. And you can see that in his performance of the Phantom. Another little side tidbit that I learned that I found interesting was that his only speaking role was in a movie called The Unholy Three, in which he played a ventriloquist.
Well, how are you today, Tommy? Oh, I'm feeling fine, thank you. Well, that's fine.
Which we all know is significant because we've all read the book or watched my 4-hour... This is significant because in the book, the Phantom is perhaps the world's greatest ventriloquist, and I think that's a neat connection. I just think it's cool. Lon Chaney eventually developed pneumonia on the set of one of his films, which was exacerbated by fake snow from set getting caught in his lungs and causing infection, and he passed away in 1930. And his son, Lon Chaney Jr., followed in his father's footsteps in terms of makeup and in terms of cinema, and eventually became part of the classic Universal Monsters lineup as the Wolfman. Now, one thing that set Lon Chaney apart from his contemporaries was his skill with makeup. You gotta keep in mind that this was very early in film history, and makeup artists hadn't yet become part of the industry. Actors were expected to do their own makeup, and most of what was done was modeled after the makeup actors would wear on stage. Dramatic, bold, easy to see from the nosebleeds. Now, the style didn't last long as film quality improved, and what looked good from the audience's perspective in a live theater did not look good on camera, but it was in this pre-makeup artist era that Lon Chaney came onto the scene. His skill with makeup, specifically the special effects he was able to achieve with makeup, is what allowed him to eventually find success as a character actor, and he would change himself into whatever these roles called for, sometimes even to the point where he was acting opposite himself as 2 separate characters. This skill eventually earned him the moniker the Man of 1,000 Faces, and led to his most iconic roles as Quasimodo in the 1923 silent version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Eric, the Phantom of the Opera, in the movie we've been talking about for a good long while now. Come on, catch up. And Chaney's portrayal of the unmasked Phantom, as we see in this unmasking scene, is to this day one of, if not the most book-accurate portrayals of Eric's face. And he accomplished this look through a variety of skillful, painful, and dangerous techniques. So first, he utilized the illustrations of Andre Castaigne that I mentioned earlier that were featured in the first print run of the novel as his inspiration for what Eric should look like. And to achieve the novel's description of a living skull with a few wispy black hairs, he wore a skull cap that gave him the appearance of a receding hairline and glued onto that a thin ring of fine black hair. And then he disguised the edge of the bald cap into the already the existing lines of his foreheads by exaggerating them with a makeup pencil. To make his head look even more like a skull, he flattened his ears, possibly using glue so that they didn't stick out, and then he made his cheekbones more pronounced by building them up with cotton and collodion. And collodion is a flammable, viscous substance originally used as surgical dressing or to coat the glass or metal plates used in photography. So, it's just a little fire starter, just a little cotton and a flammable substance just tucked right onto your cheek, just taped right onto your face right there. He then added black around his eyes to make them appear more shadowed and sunken, but added white where there needed to be highlight. And then for the most iconic aspect, the great black hole in the middle of Eric's face, Chaney used putty to make the upward angle of his nose more severe, and then put loops of wire into the nostril, and he colored the wire with black pencil so it would be invisible on screen. And then he took more wires that were hidden under more putty and under his bald cap, and those yanked his nostrils all the way back to give him that skull-like effect, and often caused him to bleed on set profusely. And they would not stop rolling, and he'd just be bleeding, and everybody's like, "Oh man, Chaney's bleeding again," but they'd keep going. And finally, for the mouth, he used prosthetic teeth that apparently went in with prongs of some sort to give him a rotten-looking set of chompers, and then he made sure that his mouth was always like distended and kept really wide, and used grease paint to highlight and contour as needed. And it's just a really cool effect. And the result is one of the most iconic and memorable versions of Eric's unmasked face, but also one of the most iconic and memorable uses of special effects makeup as one of the pioneers in the field. And the best part is Lon Chaney kept the makeup secret. If you go on IMDb, they automatically start playing the trailer for the film, and in the promotional material, they had like the front of the opera house with Chaney looming above it, but he has like a completely black mask over his face where you can't see any details at all, not even the horrible painted eye mask. And then it goes to a title screen that says, this is the trailer of the movie, where it's like, Chaney specified in his contract that no photos of the Phantom's face were to be released before the film's premiere. So they're like building up hype around what this guy looks like. And he even kept his face hidden from Mary Philbin until the opportune moment to garner a more genuine reaction. Now, one of the other things I read in Mary Philbin's mini bio, and in another article I read about her relationship with Lon Chaney, and again, all of my sources are down below, was that Mary Philbin could cry on command. She didn't need glycerin or onions, which was what a lot of actors of the day used, but apparently the director, who was not a good director, Rupert Julian, wasn't getting what he wanted from Mary when they were filming her reaction shot to the Phantom's anger after the unmasking. So this is a different shot than her initial reaction. That we got on film, and this is the shot of her like cowering back from the Phantom as he angrily rages at her for taking his mask off. Now, I mentioned briefly how weird Rupert Julian was to her, but like just to reiterate what that weirdness was, Mary Philbin was a tiny woman. She was very slender, only 5'2", and at the time of filming she was maybe 22 or 23 years old. And she was so little that the costume department used padding to fill out her figure as needed. And what Rupert Julian would do was come up and just adjust her padding at will, to the point like padding on her legs, padding on her clothes, to the point where other people on set were commenting on it, and Rupert Julian's wife, who was friends with Mary, finally had to step in and be like, hey, I'm going to take over Mary's wardrobe. Don't worry about it. I also mentioned earlier that Mary responded well to strong directors and under good guidance could give an impressive performance, but Rupert Julian was not a strong director. In fact, Rupert Julian and Lon Chaney were constantly getting into fights on set, and it's said that for the Phantom's big scenes, Chaney himself would direct and Rupert Julian wouldn't be present on set. For the particular take they were trying to get in this scene, however, Christine's reaction to the angry unmasked Phantom, Rupert Julian was the one directing because this was one of Mary's scenes, and he just kept going and going, calling for new take after new take, never getting exactly what he wanted until he finally just called it for the day and they wrapped. But Lon Chaney stopped the crew and asked if they'd be willing to stay behind to try one more take. So they got everything set up, they called action, and he turned around and just started laying into Mary Philbin, cussing, yelling, and at one point he even raised his hand as if he was about to smack her, and that is the reaction that we see on screen. And the second they got it, he called cut, he ran down to her, he apologized and explained exactly what he'd been doing and assured her that he hadn't meant any of the things that he said. And now, In the course of film history, I feel like we hear a lot about this sort of thing. Think Shelley Duvall on the set of The Shining. But in this scenario specifically, it seems like Chaney was a decent enough guy outside of this one moment that Mary was able to believe his apology, and it wasn't a pattern that continued on set. And because she loved acting herself so deeply, this made her respect him as an actor and as a director, and the two of them actually became close enough that he would stay on set anytime Rupert Julian was directing her scenes as well. So it's kind of nice. Like, it starts off and I'm like, oh, I do not like that he did that. But it's like the one instance where that actually could work out nicely. Then he kind of stood in and protected Mary going forward. So I like how it ended. Don't love the beginning. Now, a critical aspect of nailing the character of the Phantom of the Opera is that he has to be frightening, but he also has to invoke pity. Pretty much anywhere I looked online, it claimed that when 1925 audiences saw his unmasked face, there was like screaming and fainting, people running out of the theater. And now I couldn't actually find a source for the screaming and the running out of the theater, but you have to consider when the Lumiere brothers put a train on a screen for the first time, people dodged out of the way thinking a train was coming at them. So, different times. Different times. Even Mary Philbin, years later, when she was asked about her reaction to Lon Chaney's unmasked Eric, she says, "All you have to do is look at the picture and you can see my reaction when I first saw what he had done to his face." So Chaney nailed the terror aspect, especially for that time. Now here's the thing. I think as time has gone on, we, as a society, have become somewhat inured to scary faces. With the introduction of, squelchy sounds and vivid, lurid, sickly color and gooier, juicier prosthetics, what was once enough to send a 1925 crowd running has a little less impact with modern audiences. Now, I say that, but I still believe that this is insanely impressive makeup. It is so skillfully done. I love what Lon Chaney did, and it is one of the coolest aspects of this movie. All I'm saying is that it's 2025, and as a modern movie watcher who's watched modern horror movies, I'm not having nightmares about that man. I'm not having nightmares about that man. I'll tell you what I'm having nightmares about. I'm in my bed. I'm staring at the ceiling, and something is in the hallway, and I can't see it, not fully, only out of the corner of my eyes because I can't move. But I can tell you it's a man. It is a pale man, and he is crawling on his stomach down my hallway and towards my bed, and I can't get up, and I can't move, and I feel it as he reaches the bed, and he shifts his weight onto it, but he's strangely floppy and doesn't have good use of his limbs, and I feel him as he rears back his body and then flops it on top of mine, and he shifts so he can get on top of me, and I can't get up, and I can't move, and he's just laying there, and I can't see his face at all. And then I wake up. That's what I'm having nightmares about. Not that guy. Actually, I would be less scared of that guy than But what Chaney also manages to do is nail the human aspect of Eric, the pity. And I think that's because Chaney really understood the character. He's quoted as saying, "I wanted to remind people that the lowest types of humanity may have within them the capacity for supreme self-sacrifice. The dwarfed, misshapen beggar of the streets may have the noblest ideals. Most of my roles since The Hunchback, such as the Phantom of the Opera, He Who Gets Slapped, The Unholy Three, etc., have carried the theme of self-sacrifice or renunciation. These are the stories which I wish to do." And because he understood that aspect of Eric's character, he was really able to capture both the horror and the pity of the Phantom of the Opera. Especially as the scene continues on, and we get the anger in the lines, "Feast your eyes, glut your soul upon my cursed ugliness," but you also get the body language highlighting the sorrow the Phantom feels as he says, "Oh, mad Christine, who would not heed my warning." Now, in the book, this would have been a 2-week-long nightmare for Christine, where she would have had to be very smart and cunning and convincing in order to get Eric to trust her enough to let her go. But because we are speed running this, he immediately jumps to being like, "Hey, here's the thing. I'm going to prove the depths of my love to you by letting you return to your world for now, and letting you sing at the opera again." And while he's doing this, he's pointing at her, and we get that cool classic horror movie underlighting. And he finishes this statement where it's like, yay, I'm going to be free, by saying, but remember that you're mine, and you shall not see your lover again, because if you do, it is death to you both. Intense. But again, clear, well laid out boundaries and steps to follow. I'm going to become corporeal. I'm going to demand your love. I'm going to let you go and let you sing again. Don't see your stupid boyfriend. Now, I'm not saying that Christine I'm not saying that Christine should follow these rules. I'm just saying that he made it very clear what the rules were. Christine agrees, okay? We fade to black. And then the very next thing we see on screen is a note from Christine to Raoul that says, hey, although I just promised like 8 seconds ago that I was never going to see you again, I need to see you again. I'm going to be at the mask ball. Meet me there. I am not going to be alone. So keep your guard up, buddy. XOXO, Christine. I do not blame Christine at all. I don't blame Christine at all. Likely I would have done the same if I've got a psychopath saying I have to marry him, and also I have a boyfriend who I know could potentially get me out of that situation. 1, I'm in love with my boyfriend. 2, I'm not in love with the guy who kidnapped me. 3, I don't want to be in a situation where my love is demanded from me by a corporeal form, whether or not I agreed to that ahead of time. Don't demand that from me. Love should be given freely. I'm just saying, it seems like a risky next step to take immediately after agreeing. Maybe have some time to waffle. Maybe lay low for a couple days. Maybe gain his trust a little bit more and prove that you're not going to, bamboozle him before you commit the bamboozle. You gotta play the long game, Chris. Come on! But you know what? Hey, we had to get to the masquerade somehow, and here we are. And this is also where we get a fun little treat. Apparently, in both the original 1925 silent film and the 1929 sound re-release, there were 17 minutes of footage in Technicolor. What survives of that, or at least what survives in the DVD copy I have, is the ball mask scene, or the masquerade. Although, while I was doing my research, I learned that in 2020, they actually found colorized footage of the ballet from the beginning of the movie in like a Dutch film archive, and that is now available on YouTube. Very cool. Here's a clip. Neat! One thing that you'll notice while watching these old black and white silent movies is that every now and then the footage will just go into a different color. Like it's still monochrome, still technically black and white, but like the screen will just all of a sudden be more blue or more green. And I always assumed that that was just a byproduct of various preservation techniques or film degradation. But what I learned while researching this Technicolor masquerade is that silent black and white films would intentionally tint the film, like full scenes, with specific colors to enhance the mood. So blue would be for a night scene, yellow would be for a day scene, green would be for when things are getting weird and spooky. And I love that. I think that is so neat. I love people. I love storytelling. And like film has obviously come so far in the 100 years since this movie was made. But it's stuff like this, the attention to detail, the way they used the tools they could, shadows, lighting, tinting full scenes with one wash of color to evoke a certain mood, that just highlights the ingenuity of humans and artists and our drive to tell stories. And I love it. I think that is so neat. It's such a simple thing to do, but the fact that they were like, we can color this film. We should make it yellow because it's daylight. That was the simple solution to the fact that they couldn't color every scene with every color that they were seeing with their eyes. So very cool to me. And the whole masquerade scene is in actual color. And according to my research, please keep in mind that I am not an expert in Technicolor. This is just surface level research that I did to flesh out my own personal knowledge of this. But these scenes in the masquerade and the recently recovered footage of the ballet were shot in Process 2 Technicolor, which used red and green filters to create a limited color palette. And so we do get to see Eric as the Red Death at the masquerade in a vividly scarlet costume in a movie that was otherwise monochrome. There's also like some blues and some like purples, but for that I'm not sure if that is film degradation or if that is digital recoloring later down the line as the film was preserved.
Breaking news!
I'd just like to state again that apparently I've never seen this movie before. I think I bought the very first version of this movie that was ever put to DVD. Hold on, let me grab the box. The package design is copyrighted in 2001, okay? I think what happened is the fine people at Alpha Video Distributors said, DVDs are the hot new thing. Find me all of the public domain movies, and we're going to slap those on a DVD. We're going to give it a soundtrack of some sort. Like, the menu screen is literally just a play button and an index, and by the index, it's the chapters, and it only has 4 chapters. It just split the movie into 4 random quadrants. It's not a lot of thought and care was put into this one. Not to besmirch the good name of the fine folks at Alpha Video Distributors. They said, we want to put Phantom of the Opera on DVD for people to buy, and I'm grateful that I have it on DVD, right? Except now, I think I need to get a new one. I think I need to get a different DVD, because one thing about this is that they play the same, like, song over and over again, or it might be the same 2 songs throughout the entire movie. Regardless of what's going on in the scene, it is playing the same 1 or 2 tracks. And it often doesn't match the scene. Music is very important to set the mood, and even in a silent film, they had an original score that accompanied the silent film. You didn't just sit there in a quiet theater watching this happen. You had the music to, like, usher in the feelings. Like, score has always been a huge part of film. I found myself getting a little bit bored watching this. As hard as that is for me to admit, I did find it, watching this, a little bit less exciting, and I didn't feel as connected to the story because there was no music to connect me to it. Now, I've found at least 2 versions on YouTube that have that have given some thought to the score. I find myself immediately just, like, getting lost in the story the way I usually do when it comes to Phantom of the Opera. I'm appreciating Lon Chaney's performance more. I always thought it was good, but seeing it actually put to a score that matches what's happening on screen is like, oh, this man can act. Like, I knew he could, but half of my brain was turned off because I was hearing while he's, like, walking down the stairs going, like, it's just hard. I'm noticing more details about the way the characters are acting because part of my brain isn't, like, tuning out what's happening because I'm hearing the same song over and over again. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, it's terrible quality because this was put to DVD the second they had a digital file. It didn't have a chance to go through the rounds and rounds and rounds of, like, film restoration that it has at this point. What I'm finding on YouTube is so crisp and clear to compare the 2 masquerade scenes between what I have on this DVD, which is basically purples and blues, which are not colors you can get with the 2-tone Technicolor, is because it's so degraded. Even the reds that are showing up are, like, barely visible, muddled, purplish reds. They're barely noticeable. When you see him come down the stairs in his Red Death costume, it's like, oh, okay, cool. He looks good. It's cool that you kind of can tell that there's a color there. I gasped aloud at least 2 times, maybe 3 or 4 times when I watched this in actual color. Stunning is the only word I can say. And sure, I bet that this scene has gone through some digital restoration and they probably digitally recolored it a little bit. But I can actually tell that that Process 2 Technicolor that the ballet was shot in is what this was shot in as well, because you can see the main colors are a vivid red and a green, and I can actually tell. And it was so cool to see that. Like, the girl in the sparkly dress coming up the stairs is so muddled. And then it's just this stunning, gorgeous, like, crazy looking scene from 1925 when you see it in actual, like, restored color. And then when it got to the roof and he had that vivid red suit, the way that it cut across, and you could see sometimes around the hand there was like a little halo of the tinted blue on the screen because they were hand coloring it. Oh, I just gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. What I've learned more than any of the really cool trivia that I've been able to pick up on creating this video is that I have apparently never seen this movie because I have like the worst copy known to man put to DVD, and I haven't had a chance to actually appreciate it. So I wanted to let you guys know that that was the case. So when you hear some of the things I say, like, oh, I saw a lot of purples and blues, and that doesn't make sense with the Process 2 Technicolor type that was available at the time, that's because I had a bad version that I was playing. You get to scene where the little guy tries to touch the Red Death, and then the Red Death grabs his wrist and like throws him down, which is from the book. We get the cast of 5,000 in full effect, tons of different dresses, tons of different costumes, all moving around and dancing. There's just so much life and motion on screen. It's super impressive. In the book, the masquerade and the Apollo's Lair rooftop scene happen in 2 separate chapters, but here they happen on the same evening, and I think that is a very smart place to condense the action. I think it works well. So Raoul and Christine, they meet at the masquerade, and then they flee to the roof of the opera so that Christine can unburden herself of her secret terrible traumas that have been happening to her, i.e. being kidnapped by someone she thought was a ghost, but is actually a man who has gone corporeal and is demanding her love. But what they do not realize, of course, is that the Phantom has followed them up to the roof. According to my research, the scarlet of the Phantom's cloak in these rooftop scenes was done via something called the Handschigel color process, which is where color would be added in afterwards to the film by hand. And so the cloak had been colored in with red in the original film, but because that had degraded over time or needed to be digitally restored, they digitized the red color in that scene to like enhance it and bring it back. But again, this is where we get the lovers meeting, Christine unburdening her secrets to Raoul, the two of them deciding to flee to England after one final performance by Christine, and the Phantom, to his sorrow, witnesses the entire thing. Now here's a little something else that's interesting. So, Norman Carey, in another article I read, it quoted Mary Philbin as saying, "Oh, he was very naughty on screen and off, but he was a very handsome and charming man despite his roving hands." Apparently this guy just did not care about acting. Like, he's quoted as saying he acted because if he didn't act, he would have to get a real job. And for Lon Chaney, who was someone who loved acting, this was incredibly annoying. And in this scene where we see Raoul and Christine embrace, which is not a kiss, it's a kiss in the book. In this, it is more of an embrace in which he like sniffs her neck in a way that I find a little bit uncomfortable to watch. You see Christine like grab Raoul's wandering hand to stop it from where it's trying to wander and like move it aside. And apparently behind the scenes lore says that Norman Carey was just trying to cop a feel. Like in every single take they did, his hands would wander where they would, and Mary had to just keep trying to dodge. And so nobody's certain if like this was a choice made by the director, like to have his hand do this in this scene and have her stop it as like a way of being like, whoa, calm your ardor and your passion, Raoul, this isn't the time. Or if it was actually Mary Philbin being like, whoa, co-worker, get your hand away from there. But like it being a choice by the director might not be likely because this was a big Phantom scene. If Lon Chaney was directing, it doesn't seem likely that he would have let Norman Carey get away with that. But whatever it was, whatever the reason, it's there, his hand doth wander, and she doth throw it off as best she can. So, while, the lovers, except they don't, he just sniffs her neck, the Phantom's just like tossing down angry fistfuls of rage at them, and Christine and Raoul run into the opera house and bump into the guy who should be the Persian but isn't. He sends them in another direction, just like the fez-wearing Persian does in the book. All right, so what we're getting into now is a huge departure from the source material as we go into the final lair scene. And it is a departure that I do not like, nor do I appreciate it. All right. We leave Eric and Christine and we cut to a file labeled Eric. And in the file is a notice that says, "Eric, Born during the Boulevard Massacre, self-educated musician and master of black arts, exiled to Devil's Island for the criminally insane, escaped, now at large. Turns out this file is located in a police station, and lots of adaptations moving forward, including the musical, utilize this aspect that the silent film introduces of the cops being involved prior to the final kidnapping of Christine Daae. Like, there wasn't enough drama in someone getting kidnapped off the stage mid-performance. Now he's got to do it surrounded by cops. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm okay either way. I'm fine either way. But here's this, okay? Eric has escaped from something called Devil's Island for the criminally insane. First of all, why would you send your criminals to the Devil's Island? Don't you think that would just make things worse? Second, we don't get any further information about that. Like, if you're gonna dangle that kind of backstory in front of me, build on that. Weave me a tale, storyteller. Don't just throw a file at me and expect me to be okay with this when you're still trying to tell Gaston Leroux's story. You don't just change one detail. You commit. If you're going to change things, you commit. Commit to it. And they're not committing. Between the cops and the drama that comes after, we get a cute little scene of Raoul and Christine at the opera for her final performance. He kisses his handkerchief and wipes her eyes. And then we veer off the beautifully well-maintained, well-laid path laid out for us by Gaston Leroux onto a gnarly looking side road that has, that stole some of the framing from the actual railway, and it's careening us into nonsense. We just start going, the train is rumbling over that. And I, as a Phantom purist, do not care for the changes they make at all. So, the little mime is back. Little Florent Papillon from the beginning shows back up, and we spend an inordinate amount of time with him and the stage crew from this point on. Now, hey, fair is fair. And as I complained about in the book, right after Christine is kidnapped, we spend 6 chapters with the managers instead of with our main characters. And so in that way, us detouring over to spend time with the stagehands is book accurate, to the spirit of the book at least. But that's not what we're doing. No, Florine Papillon discovers a dead body. The dead body is Joseph Bouquet. Florine Papillon tells Joseph Bouquet's brother that we have never met before, Simon Bouquet, that his brother, Joseph Bouquet, they then say that it must have been the Strangler, who has never been mentioned before, and then a mob forms, led by the brother on a righteous quest to exact revenge on he who killed Joseph Bouquet who died too soon because he knew too much about the Phantom. I cannot convey to you how little I care about Joseph Bouquet's brother that I have never met before at this point in the story. There are already plots in motion. There are stories we are telling. And it is way too late to start introducing a random backstory like the fact that Eric is a master in the black arts, whatever that means. Is that the dark arts, like wizardry? Or introducing random characters we've never met, like why? Screenwriters from the 1925 silent film Phantom of the Opera starring Lon Chaney, Norman Kelly, Mary Philbin, and a cast of 5,000 extras as presented by Carl Lammel. Why couldn't sweet little Florine Papillon, who we've known since the beginning of the movie, be his brother? Why? Why is it some guy we've never seen before named Simon Bouquet, who Leroux never wrote about? Leroux also never wrote about Florine Papillon, but at least we've known Florine since the beginning. Why are we learning about Simon just now? Put a pin in that, because this whole group will be back to ruin more stuff for me. Anyway, couple neat things we do get to see is Eric reaching in to switch out the lighting crew's drinks for some doctored bottles, which is a point for book accuracy. But then, you know what? That's your last point. In fact, I may start taking away points for book accuracy because Christine is kidnapped, as she is always kidnapped at this point in the story, and Raoul meets up with the man who should be the Persian but is not, and the man who should be the Persian but is not says, "I am Ledoux of the secret police, and I have studied the Phantom for months." Here is verbatim what my notes were in this section, and please keep in mind I was doing voice to text because I didn't want to look away from the screen and miss any title cards. I said, I take back everything I said. I thought that he's wearing an ashkatan cap. He's supposed to be the Persian, and they have him be Ledoux, the secret police. Ledoux, who's not in the book. Ledoux, who is part of the 1990s TV miniseries. The 1990 TV miniseries. I'm outraged. I am outraged. I'm filled with rage. I can't believe they've done this to me. I thought I had forgotten. I hadn't seen this in so long. I thought that I had forgotten that this version actually has the Persian as the Persian, but they don't. Justice for my Persian chief of police. How dare they? And also, the inspector in the book was named Mifoy, and he did not show up until Christine was properly kidnapped. He wasn't already there studying. Oh, gosh. Anyway, it was a betrayal I was not prepared for because I had forgotten that they had betrayed me. I'd seen this already and then forgotten, and it got my hopes up only to have them shattered. Anyway, those two team up, Ledoux and Raoul, and go hunt down the Phantom, and the Phantom is, of course, trying to force Christine to marry him, blah, blah, blah. Please, you know what? This is usually the best part of the movie, and they've soiled it. They have soiled it. Ledoux tells Raoul to keep his hands at the level of his eyes, and yes, we do get to see Philippe de Chaney following his brother, which is left out of almost every other version of Phantom, and we do get to see the alarm for the siren go off, and Eric swim away with the reed in his mouth, which is a very cool nod to the book that we also never see pretty much anywhere else in any other Phantom adaptation, but you still don't get any points because you've broken my trust. You know what you did. So Raoul and Ledoux fall into the torture chamber by accident, and that also makes me mad because here's the thing, right? The reason Joseph Bouquet's death was significant in the books, aside from the fact that he was a human with a soul and a heart and was, had inherent value simply for being alive, was the fact that his death and the location of his death was the catalyst for the Persian to finally find what he thought was a second entrance to the Phantom's lair. So when Raoul and the Persian are on this quest to get to Eric and Christine, they are on a quest to get to that trap door, and the Persian and Raoul willingly drop through the trap door, and it's only once they've taken that step that they realize they've made a terrible mistake, and the realization comes from the Persian's personal history with the Phantom. But in this movie, Joseph Bouquet dies for no reason and at a really weird time in the plot, and it takes away that twist, that reveal that the Persian and Raoul have willingly walked into a horrible trap. And it also takes away the backstory of the Persian knowing the Phantom, the dawning horror of realizing where they are, the Persian recognizing it for what it is. Like, did this version of Eric even go to Persia and build a palace full of traps? And if so, was that before or after he went to the Devil's Island for the criminally insane? Lots of the rest of this plays out the way it does in the book. Christine tries to save them by getting the keys from the little bag of life and death so she can open the door from her side. The Phantom stops her, makes her decide between turning the grasshopper and the scorpion. If she turns the scorpion, she'll be saying yes. If she turns the grasshopper, she'll be saying no, and beware the grasshopper. When it hops jolly high. Raoul and Ledoux discover the gunpowder under the room, that it'll blow the opera house up, and Christine turns the scorpion to save all their lives. The torture chamber floods, she begs for Raoul and Ledoux's life, they both survive, blah, blah, blah. I wish I was not saying blah, blah, blah to what is technically the most accurate version of the finale that we have to date. It was all so close, and I think that's what makes me the most mad, because this is the part where Eric should be going from monster to man because of Christine's kindness. This is where he should let her go because he realizes that loving someone means doing what's best for them and not what's best for you. This is where he starts dying of a broken heart, brokenheartedly, and confesses that broken heart to the only person who could possibly even be considered his friend, the Persian. No such luck. No such luck, pal. No such luck, Bobby boy. This whole time, while we've had this almost book-perfect final lair scene, we've been cutting back and forth between the final lair to that stupid mob that's been forming. And the mob, finding all the dirty catacomb water drained because it was used to flood the torture chamber. I will admit, I like that detail. I like that there was cause and effect there. They are able to just run all the way through the catacombs to the Phantom's door without a boat, without having to worry about swimming, nothing. They can just run straight there. When the mob starts pounding on his door, Eric grabs Christine and absconds with her through a secret emergency exit pursued by the mob, and forces her into a carriage, and he takes that carriage and starts careening down the street to get away from the horde of men chasing him. Christine eventually flings herself from the carriage. Eric tries to turn back to her but can't. Raoul has to protect Christine from the stampeding mob, and Eric has to continue on until he can move forward no more because he's reached the like banks of the Seine, and the bank of the Seine is like a concrete wall into the Seine. The mob jumps him, hits him in the head with hammers a bunch of time, and then throws him in the river. Yes, let me just say that again. Instead of having a moment of redemption, releasing Christine because he finally felt the briefest touch of human kindness, and immediately dying of a broken heart, he kidnaps Christine a second time, gets jumped, gets hit in the head with hammers, and then gets tossed into the river Seine, dead. The end. Fini. Okay, so, well, let's move into a little bit of the trivia I wasn't able to fit into the rest of the script before I start ranking stuff. First, Gaston Leroux gave the book to Carl Laemmle directly. In 1922, Laemmle was on a trip to France, met Leroux, and was like, "Isn't the Paris Opera neat?" And then Leroux was like, "I'll show you something neat," and handed him his novel. Laemmle apparently read it in one night and immediately bought the rights to the movie so that he could make it with Lon Chaney as the Phantom. Second, one thing I found really interesting about Mary Philbin that I mentioned a couple times was that she was not trained in acting and only thrived under strong directors. And when I've watched this movie in the past, I've always found her performance a little hammy, like big gestures and overacting. But learning that Rupert Julian was a bad director and that being under bad directors often caused her performances to suffer was like an interesting little bit of validation to be like, okay, I was actually clocking something there, that this wasn't the best performance it could be. And so it's just neat to have that context now, and I just found that interesting. Third, and perhaps most frustrating of all, apparently they did film a book accurate ending to this movie, but the studio didn't like it. So they started messing with perfection and came up with a couple alternate endings trying different things, until it was ultimately decided to keep him a devil till the end. Horrible choice. And eventually they got to the point in their meddling where they reshot almost the entire movie to be a romantic comedy complete with like gag side characters and a second love interest for Christine. So the movie was basically just focused on Christine trying to choose between these two love stories, and like a Phantom of the Opera happened to also be there. But it was so bad that it got booed off the screen in the preview showing in San Francisco or San Diego or something, one of the Sands in California, until they finally re-edited it, cut almost all of the new comedic footage, added back in the original footage, and wound up with something that was almost perfect in terms of book accuracy. There was just so much neat stuff about the behind the scenes of this movie, tangents and rabbit holes I fell down. I tried to fit as much of it as I could into this video, but the movie just has a fascinating history if you guys want to look into it yourself. All right, and now that brings us to ranking. So, let's rank this bad boy. First is, of course, ranking on book accuracy. There are 6 elements that we will be basing the accuracy on. Overall adherence of the plot to the source material, Christine's outfit when the Phantom kidnaps her, the unmasking scene, the appearance of the mask, Eric's unmasked face, and of course the final lair scene. Overall adherence to the plot is going to be the heaviest hitter in this, making up 30% of the final score. On the whole, this movie sticks so close to the book, with most of the changes being minor cuts made for time. However, I find the ending so egregious that I had to take 5 points away, and I'm being generous. I almost took away more. But then I had to step back and be like, Summer, one of these is a Disney Channel original based in a movie theater. Keep it together. Stay focused. Be reasonable. 5 points. I deducted 5 points. Christine's outfit when the Phantom first kidnaps her. So in the book, this is the scene where Christine is Sybil in Faust, a male role. It is the performance in a house with a curse on it when the chandelier falls. Christine then runs immediately from the stage to her dressing room, and she is wearing a costume, charmingly dressed in boys' clothes, it is said, and that is the outfit she is wearing when she is taken to the Phantom's lair for the first time. It's such a small detail that almost no one adheres to, but it's always nice to see it when it does happen, So it's going to be worth 5%. Very tiny percentage, but I just like to, it's nice to look out for that. In this movie, she is wearing a beautiful dress. I will never be mad at a beautiful dress, and I love the drama of the scarf she drags behind her. Visually stunning. I would rather her not be charmingly dressed in boys' clothes if she has the opportunity to wear a gorgeous dress and trail a beautiful lacy scarf behind her in the dark. But we are ranking on book accuracy, and that is not book accurate, so 0 out of 5. The unmasking scene, an important aspect worth 15% of the final tally, and this version was very accurate. We got some of the classic dialogue, we got the vibe, the settings correct, the anger. The only thing missing, I would say, is the sheer intensity from the scene in the book, like with how close he was getting to her, forcing her to use her nails to scratch his face. Honestly, I think that unless it was an R-rated horror movie made in more modern day, or perhaps during an important episode, maybe episode 4 or 5 in the 8-episode miniseries of Phantom of the Opera, directed by Guillermo del Toro and starring Jamie Campbell Bower as the Phantom, it might be too much for the screen unless audiences were well prepared and that was already the vibe. So this one is tamer than in the book, but very, very close. So for that, I'm going to give it 13 out of 15. And then we have the appearance of the mask. This is worth 15% of the final tally. In the book, the mask was black, and it did not have horrible eyes painted on it. But this might be the only version with the barbe du masque piece of cloth. So for me, 14 out of 15. Eric's unmasked face. This is another crucial aspect worth 15% of the final tally. And you know what? 10s across the board for this one. The only things that are not book accurate about his look is that Lon Chaney still had a nose, and that he was a healthy and robust enough man that his eyes weren't sunk so deep into his head that you could only see them blazing in deepest darkness, and they didn't glow like a cat's. So basically what I'm saying is it would be impossible with the technology of the day to make something more accurate than Lon Chaney's makeup. He is still like the king. He did it. He did it. And we thank him for it. 15 out of 15. And the final lair. This is very important to me, worth 20% of the final grade. So overall adherence to the plot and the final lair make up 50%. So here's the thing that I'm going to be honest with you and admit. Pretty much all the adaptations from here on out are going to spiral further and further from the book, especially in the final lair scene. This is the most book-accurate adaptation to date. I will say that to you right now. And I think that's why the finale makes me so angry. The other versions depart enough from the source material that their final lair scenes, while often not nearly as impactful as the final lair in the book is to me, their final lair scenes fit their stories, so they don't offend me when I see them. This version came so close to actually being the book version and then ruined the ending by taking away Eric's redemption arc. The fact that the studio made the conscious decision to keep him a devil till the end, but keeping everything else the same around it, oh, that offends me deeply. Because the Phantom was always meant to be a tragic figure. Evil, yes, but yearning to be good. And his transformation from a monster whose anger at the world robs him from remorse into a man who can recognize that loving Christine means letting her free is the point of the story. Even Lon Chaney recognized that with the Phantom. I do not think he wasn't playing toward an end where he stayed a devil till the end. I don't think that's what he was trying for when he was giving us that fabulous performance. And even in this version, they have the threads. He says Christine's goodness and love will make him a better man. He's on that path where he wants to be better, but he's so bitter that he doesn't know how. And they took that from him. They took it away. They took his opportunity for redemption in favor of a garbage mob chase scene where the Phantom gets beaten to death with hammers and then tossed in a river. Like, that is the most satisfying conclusion they could come up with. That's the ending they decided on. It is cheap. It's needlessly violent. It introduces new characters late in the third act that were never mentioned earlier in the story, and it constantly pulls away from the emotional drama and tension building between the main cast to show us a group of men we don't care about and have not met until like 8 seconds earlier. I do not care. I don't care if this movie is turning 100 years old and is the foundation of the series that I'm doing. I do not care that in 1998 the Library of Congress added this movie to the National Film Registry because it was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. That doesn't change the fact that it choked at the finish line and bombed the ending. You don't get a pass, old man. This is a crime that you committed against me personally, and there is no statute of limitations in my court. But I cannot give it a 0, as my passion wishes, because I have to be fair. It does have the siren, it does have the phantom using the reed to breathe, 2 points. It does have the torture chamber, 3 more points. And it does have the scorpion and the grasshopper, 4 points. It almost did it, which is why it will get a 9 out of 20. For book accuracy of this, the most book accurate version of Phantom of the Opera we have to date, the final tally is 76%. Oh no, this does not bode well for the book accuracy going forward if this got a C. Oh, but I can't change it. Maybe the studio heads should have thought better of keeping him a devil till the end if they wanted a better grade on their report card. Anyway, okay, my personal score. This will be based on the uniqueness of the take, how much I like the uniqueness of the take, how much the Phantom's fate makes me want to cry at the end, and basically whether I liked it or not. As to uniqueness of take, this is not a very unique take. 3 out of 25. It took no risks, except the worst risk it could have possibly taken, the risk of ruining the ending, which it did. But I appreciate how little the plot deviated from the original. In almost all aspects, it respected the book, and legend says that there are even deleted scenes that include the trip to Paris-Garec and the backstory of the Angel of Music, as well as that book-accurate ending they decided to cut, and even if those are lost to time, I like knowing that they almost existed, or at least existed briefly, for a few shining moments. So to honor the fact that this is one of, if not the, most book-accurate version that exists to date, I will give it a 23 out of 25 in terms of how much I appreciate the uniqueness of plot. Now, The Phantom's fate and its effect on my tear ducts, 0 out of 25. Listen to me, studio heads of Universal circa 1925. If I could figure out a way to reverse haunt you, I would. If I could find your souls and chastise them where they rest, I would. But that's not possible, so all I can say is how dare you? How dare you deny me my tears? How dare you take my catharsis and throw it in the Seine with the Phantom's body? You get no points from me. You get no points from a random woman you never met and who wouldn't be born until long after your bones turned to dust. No points for you! Spider-Man! And finally, how much I like it. 25 out of 25. I just think this movie's so neat. I had so much fun diving into the behind the scenes, the history, learning more about the techniques and the choices behind the decisions that were made, and the people who brought this story to life for the first time. It's not a version I watch very often, but I really appreciate it for bringing the story to life in a way that resonates even today, and that inspired so many more movies and shows and books to be made later down the line. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Comment below if you're as mad as I am about the ending, or if you don't care as much. Comment below and tell me if you like it better. But just understand, I will post an angry looking emoji in response. I'm going to do that smiley face that's like this. The Florence Pugh frown. I'm going to post that if you say you like this ending better than the book ending. So just know, I want to see it. But just understand the consequences. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next installment of 100 Years of Phantom, where we'll be going over The Phantom of the Opera from 1943, starring Claude Rains as the Phantom. God bless and Jesus loves you. Bye!
Also, I was watching a video about this movie, and I heard someone say Carl Laemmle. I think his name might be Carl Laemmle. I don't have it in me to confirm, so I think I'll keep that a mystery.